Hello, my name is Brian Thomas. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Grizzly. I'm here with Sarah Hojsak, the features editor, and we are here to do a year-end interview with President Brock Blomberg. Basically, how we went about this, we scheduled the interview and then solicited questions from the student body. This interview and conversation is going to comprise of questions that our staff thought of, as well as questions that were sent to us by members of the Ursinus community. So yeah, first off, thanks for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it, Sarah and Brian, and appreciate the questions from the community. It's always nice to get out and to learn more about what everybody's thinking about and engage.
Great. So we're just going to jump right in. And so the first question that we have is something that we generated. And so we just wanted to ask that since you've been here these past 2 years, what is the thing that Ursinus has accomplished that you're most proud of? And what is something that you think we could have done better?
Oh, wow. It's
a two-pronged
I thought I'd get a softball question to start out. No, I mean, I think for me, the thing that drew me to Ursinus, the thing that I'm always excited about are the students. When I was first approached for the position, I met some students on campus, and I really was moved by their stories and how they accomplished so much. And so for me, you know, when I hear about, yesterday was COSA, and I got a chance to watch students give their presentations, you know, on a daily basis. That kind of stuff really drives the institution. All the other stuff, the exciting buildings of the Innovation Discovery Center or the Philadelphia Experience or the Commons or this new case or the fact that we're moving in areas of diversity and all these initiatives that I'm so excited about, it's really sort of background noise for what really matters, which is watching students, watching them, you know, reach their dreams and have great experiences on campus. And I've seen that throughout, you know, the time I've been here. So that's, I would say, that the high water mark. In terms of some of the challenges, you know, we're living in a real challenging time overall in our nation. You know, over the last couple of years, we've had some turmoil on the political scene, and I think that has spilled over into our campus, and I think that in some ways we've really done a great job of exemplifying the liberal arts and had constructive dialogue and been thoughtful and responsible and independent. And I think other times, sometimes we haven't been our best selves in some of those engagements, from people at the top of the board all the way down to members of our you know, staff, faculty, administration, and students. And I think it's a challenge for us right now. I'd like us to have a more civil discourse. I don't always see us be our best selves when we communicate.
Can you just maybe define a little bit more clearly when you say political turmoil and civil discourse? Can you point to some specific instances, both on the national
Sure, and I don't want to, in any way, shape, or form, you know, turn this into a partisan conversation. But we're in a world now where I think the way that the president communicates and the way that people listen to the way the president communicates creates a lot of heat. And I think that people respond in ways that you'd ordinarily respond. If you put something in social media, a tweet, and it's like, wow, what a sunny day we have today, no one's going to care. But if you say something acrimonious or strong, you'll get lots of retweets and lots of feedback. And so I think that encourages a dialogue and a conversation that quickly moves to pointedness. It quickly moves to, instead of trying to find ways we can work together, how we can create divisions and fractures. And I think in some ways that's provocative and that's great, but in other ways it's not open for learning. Learning is centered around vulnerability, I think, and it's hard for people to get vulnerable if it's constant missives in that way. And so I use the national front because I think we're all modeling each other in that way, and I see that, you know, happen on our own campus as well, and that can actually hurt people, particularly, you know, during these formative years. And certainly not the way I think that we would like to engage. At least I don't think that's the right way to engage. So when I say civil discourse, you know, I don't think it has to be expression that's completely free, but it should be healthy and thoughtful. And there should be ways that we should be able to talk to one another about hard things, because there's a lot of rough stuff going on in the world. We see, bombs, poverty, health concerns, challenges on the domestic and international front. In order for us to be our best selves, we should really be able to talk about it in an adult, thoughtful way instead of quickly retreating to our own corners and starting the octagon of conversations. If that makes any sense. I don't know if that
I think it does.
answered your question.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question arises from a number of the student body who have commented recently on the seeming disparity between Ursinus's recent focus on things like entrepreneurship and the liberal arts. So do you see these ventures as contradictory at all? And how would you define the liberal arts?
It's a great question. Obviously, I don't see them as contradictory. I've actually put out things in Huffington Post and other areas where I'm championing the relationship between the two of them. And I think I love the liberal arts. I went to a liberal arts institution. I've taught at 2 liberal arts places. I'm a president of a liberal arts place. All 4 of my children went to liberal arts institutions. I think it is the best way to educate. I think when I think of the liberal arts, it's part of the delivery system. It's an intimate setting like this where people can talk about things, and that's the best way, again, to be vulnerable. It's the best way to build what I think is one of the most important skill sets we need to build, which is empathy. It's much more challenging to get empathy in a larger structure. But it's also the disciplines that we teach. It's very cross-disciplinary. And I think that's really important. My own research is very cross-disciplinary. I work on the economics of terrorism. If you can think of anything that's a little bit less siloed, I don't know. And so, it builds on areas of political science, economics, sociology. Certainly, you have to be able to communicate through literature. There's a lot of science involved. So I think of all of that aspect as the liberal arts. And I think what we need to do in that setting, or what happens in this magic, this special sauce we have, where you have these intimate conversations and you're reading the great books and you're discussing things cross-disciplinary, is you build up capacities in working collaboratively, thinking critically, communicating effectively, making just decisions. And those are the types of traits that are critical. Now, why I think that is really related to entrepreneurism is in the world we're living today, we're seeing more and more some of the standard bearers of historic institutions crumbling. AI and other structures are going to change the way we do business. There'll be, unmanned cars. We're going to be working in an environment where the way that we think of business and the way that we think of education is going to change. It's going to be creative destruction. And in that world, what better way to be prepared than through a liberal arts education? And I think taking the pivot for liberal arts, but allowing ourselves to be open sourced and to be ready to be thoughtful and engage in that world actually puts our students and our institution at a distinct advantage over those that might be very, very narrow or siloed. If you consider a lot of the challenges we have in the world today, I would make the argument that some of that comes from lack of liberal arts education. A lot of the people, policymakers, a lot of the decision makers at the highest level, engineers, PhDs in particular areas, they've thought very narrowly, and maybe that's why we're caught in some of the wars we are in the Middle East. Maybe that's why we haven't figured out better decisions for healthcare. Maybe that's why we're still looking for ways to decrease unemployment and create jobs. And that's why I think actually entrepreneurism and the liberal arts go hand to glove, because that's providing a certain skill set, a certain thoughtfulness, a certain larger lens to look at things. And we need to embrace both aspects of being able to be agile and nimble and thoughtful and independent and responsible, which is our liberal arts message, with a world that needs that exact capacity.
I think you touched on something that actually highlights the kind of tension that prompted this question. And it's this idea that both liberal arts and entrepreneurism are kind of defined by people on their own. I think a lot of people, especially here, based on the conversations that we have had, view entrepreneurial thinking as the means to just getting a job, and they view it as very inherently competitive, and they see that as the kind of contradiction. They think that the goal of entrepreneurism is to be in business and to beat the other entrepreneurs, which is not a totally misguided view, in my opinion. And they think that the goal of the liberal arts is to more foster this kind of cross-disciplinary thinking, this kind of collaborative approach to the world, and they view these things as just unable to mesh. And I was wondering if you maybe could speak just a little bit more on that tension specifically, which is what I think people are getting at.
And I understand that tension, and it's a creative tension. And I will say sometimes some of the best stuff comes when you have a certain level of tension there that you're trying to balance different sort of interests. I do recognize, if we're going to use hyperbole, are we going to turn ourselves into a DeVry, a pre-professional institution that's only interested in grinding out humanity, where people are seeking very narrow positions? I think that's one view of entrepreneurism, and whereas the liberal arts, I think the other, totem, we're all going to just think great thoughts and sometimes write them down, and that's the way the world should be. And I think both of those ideals are kind of creating their own fractures. Like I said, when we began this conversation, where we're split, we're looking for difference as opposed to looking for ways to get together. Everyone who goes here, I hope, is going to be productively engaged after graduation. I mean, that's the goal. That's not why we're not just giving you a ticket for a job or a graduate school, but we do want people to be productive in their life. And so if that means whatever occupation you take, we want to champion. And I think we would be a disservice if we were going to, in some sense, privileged one type of occupation over another, because I think the world is full, and Ursinus is full of wonderful stories of people who have gone on. Jody Simone is right now creating 3D carbon, which is in the wheelhouse of Silicon Valley, creating printers that are being used for shoes and other areas. He's about as entrepreneurial as you're going to get, but yet he was a chemistry professor before that and studied here at Ursinus, and so he got the full liberal arts experience. He's been on our board. I don't see that as conflict. I see that as alignment. But I do understand this natural concern that the reason that we are doing what we're doing is purely for getting jobs. And I'm probably talking too long on this, but part of this, I think, is actually, again, I'll point the finger a little bit at the national debate. When we listen to policymakers and they say things like, well, what we want to do is provide education, free education for everybody so everybody can get a job. And what that does is that demeans the experience of why you're here. I purposely think some of the best stuff I learned is not related to, getting a PhD in economics. It's the fact that I can reflect on things, that I can engage in my experiences and think about, humanity and relate my favorite Emily Dickinson poem and get to that kind of, go to a music festival and feel touched in ways that are well beyond anything in the classroom. And that's the kind of stuff I think that you really get from a liberal arts education. That's being, living a life that has more meaning. I think that the national debate has kind of boiled that larger understanding into a cost structure. It's expensive, so what are you getting from that expense? I want something that I can narrowly define as ROI, return on investment. And again, I don't want to diminish the fact that we want people to be productive and do well, but that is such a narrow view of what college is all about.
Great. Our next question that we have here is related to both admissions and part of your strategic plan that has been talked about. So a goal of yours that you've discussed at length is making Ursinus a first choice institution. And I was just wondering if you could expand on why you think that is so important, and do you think that it is currently not a first choice institution?
So the way it's articulated is a first choice learning institution for students, faculty and staff, philanthropy, and our local community. So I want to use that larger understanding because I think that helps put in context what I mean by a first choice learning institution and areas in which you can grade them as you will. So when students came here, was this your first choice to come to Ursinus?
I had a lot of choices.
Right.
It was a difficult choice to make.
Right. It was a difficult choice. Was it your first choice?
I don't think I had a first choice, and I know a lot of people feel the same way.
Okay. Did you? Was Ursinus your first choice?
It was actually the only school I applied to.
It was your first choice. That's
yes,
terrific.
it was my only choice. Yes.
So I've asked this question to students before, and I would say the supermajority say it's their first choice or something along the lines of it was, among many really high levels. So I would say on the student level, we are certainly moving in that direction, if not already there. We always want that to feel like I'm really satisfied and happy that I'm doing this. We talked earlier a little bit about the cost of higher ed. If you're going to spend money to come here, we want you to feel like it is, you're getting a lot more out of it than you're putting in. For staff and faculty, if you ask them on a sort of a climate survey, if this is the place that they really want to work, I think again you're going to mostly get the answer to be yes. But I think we can do better in that area as well, and that's one of the things we're trying to do is build up with a strategic plan our human resources capacities, so we can do a better job of providing for training if workers need it, or opportunities if faculty want a little more support, and we can create evaluation opportunities for them. And so that helps them feel like, yes, here at Ursinus I feel that this is a place that I want to put first choice. For philanthropy, we have a pretty large endowment, but it could be larger. A lot of our competitors have a larger endowment. So when people give back, I'll put it back on you. Have either of you given any money to the college yet?
Not yet.
I understand.
Not yet either.
So when you graduate, as you become young alums, I would hope that at some point this will be one of your first choices for your philanthropy. Because the life of the mind, there's a lot of competition for that. And we want to be up there as one of the areas that will, draw you back and come back for homecoming or come back for some of the events that we want to do. For the first choice for the community, we really want to build out a lot of our amazing programs, whether it's at the art museum or whether it's the kaleidoscope or our sports or other types of activities. So when we say first choice learning institution, it doesn't mean that we're not doing a good job. In fact, I think in many ways we're pretty dang close in that area. But what it does mean is we want to ascend and we want to aspire in all of these areas so we can actually test ourselves and ask, how am I doing? Is this the place that you want to give your first dollar to? Is this the institution that you would, for the right student, by the way, is this the place that you really want to go? For the right faculty and staff. I came here because it was my first choice. I really wanted to work with students and faculty and staff and the whole community. Is this their first choice? And then again, we want to create a whole destination community where in the long run, when you come back in 20 or 30 years to Ursinus, it's thriving, it's got a whole lot of other activities going on, and that's really what I mean by a first choice learning institution. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think
thank
so.
you.
So it's no secret that enrollment for the class of 2020 was maybe lower than usual. So is the enrollment pattern in recent years concerning at all? And is next year looking up?
Well, I think what we've seen isn't just about last year. I want to be really clear about that. We have a sawtooth pattern for enrollment over the last 5 or 6 years. So we've seen ups and downs in terms of the class size. But it's even more complicated than just the class that's coming in. We also want to make sure that we're getting, we're being selective and we're getting the, shaping the class well. We want a diverse group of students who are all here for the same type of education and can thrive in that. And so we want to retain those students too. That's important. And we also want to understand a balance there of being able to provide a lot of scholarships for students who are needy, but on the same time being able to have people sitting around a table at Wismer where you're getting, again, a diverse socioeconomic background. So maybe some people who are coming from greater ability to pay versus those that aren't. And so we want to actually worry about things like a discount rate, which is really a measure of how much scholarships we're giving. We have to balance that. So while last year's class was lower, it's a complicated factor of all these things that have been sort of up and down over the last 5 or 6 years. The answer to your question of is it concerning? I think it is a challenge at Ursinus. It's a challenge at a lot of places in higher ed. And so what we've tried to do with this strategic plan is come up with some strategies and some different types of capacity building, particularly in the area of enrollment, to help us in all those areas, like I said. We want to our goal this year is to lower our acceptance rate. Our goal this year is to increase enrollment over last year in terms of first-year class. Our goal is to lower the discount rate. And our goal is to maintain quality. To do 4 of those things in a given year is quite a big swing. And that's the kind of goal that we've set out. But we've also given a lot of capacities, and we're going to continue to give a lot of capacities to our enrollment team to do that. We're in the process of hiring someone who can help with diversity because we want to shape the class better. We're in the process of hiring someone who can help with analytics so we can do some real-time measurement of how students are doing in terms of whether we're getting the right numbers, whether we're engaging the right people through digital marketing. We've increased a whole new digital marketing campaign to do all of that. The short answer to your question, which I've well past the ability to call this a short answer, is I think things are looking better for the given year. One of the frustrating things that I'm learning about the area that we're in is you don't know until May 1, May 15 exactly what that means. I will say we are significantly up in terms of applications. We're up by 40% in applications, which is, from everything I've seen, one of the highest numbers I've seen across. But that doesn't mean the class size is going to go up by 40. In fact, it definitely won't because we're trying to do those 4 things I mentioned. And it also doesn't necessarily mean that we're necessarily going to get a dramatic increase or not over last year. We don't know. That all depends on yield. And I really appreciate the fact that the community has tried to come together to help us increase yield. So early signs continue to be positive, but quite frankly, I know it's a terrible answer for anyone to say, but we're not going to really know what it's going to look like until May.
But so do you know about lowering the acceptance rate? I mean, they had to have gotten acceptance rate.
Yes, so right now, so what happens is it is conceivably possible that we will let in some other students at different times.
Okay.
But right now, the acceptance rate is in the 70s, which I believe is still higher than we'd like it to be, but it's been over 80% for the last 3 years, I think it is. So this is right now I think we're about 5 percentage points lower, which is a dramatic decrease in the acceptance rate. So that's an increase in the acceptance rate, I should say.
Right.
Yeah, we'll get the math right in my head. So right now we're 5 percentage points lower. Our discount rate that we're trying to monitor is also about 2 discount rates, 2 points lower is what we're aiming for this year. Again, I don't know what that's going to look like at the end of the day, but that looks pretty good. We are tracking above the number of students that had enrolled at this point last year. I will say that. But again, the last 3 weeks or so, whatever's left, is some of the largest swings, so I don't want to get too far ahead of what that's going to look like.
Great. So our next question has to do with an issue that has been on a lot of students' minds this year and was one of the things that broadly came up when we were soliciting questions, and that has to do with the issues surrounding the cleaning staff and the actions that have been taken by USAS, that have been led by USAS to try and start a discussion around what they call insourcing the cleaning staff.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to have a discussion about that. And I wanted to start by saying, do you think that insourcing, and by what I understand them to mean by that is having, instead of a third-party cleaning company, hiring the same people who are currently here as Ursinus employees. That's what the posters that say your name say. And I was wondering if, first off, do you think that is a viable option? And do you think that?
So we've been exploring this for 2 years, and I want to, thank the community for asking me this question. I want to thank USAS for their vigilance, and I think that's terrific that they care about an important member of our community. I want to say a couple things on this. First, a little bit of the process. So we started engaging last year when Axel Gonzalez and the group brought it to our attention, some of the challenges that appeared to be going on through the cleaning staff. And so at that moment in time, we started engaging with Olympus to try to talk to them. It's not as simple, and I appreciate the challenge that students feel, like, well, if I say something, can you change it tomorrow? That we have longer term contracts, and we have to make sure that the allegations that are being presented are in fact true, and we have to decide whether or not we want to give, different groups the opportunity to improve, as opposed to necessarily letting them go. So that's been a process. So the first year we looked into it, and actually there were some changes made. The management of Olympus did eliminate certain positions for people who were looking as though they were not treating staff appropriately. So we thought that was definitely a movement in the right direction. We're continuing to look at this problem, and it's conceivably possible we will look for a different process. But I would never want to put ourselves into a corner and say all options aren't on the table, because we have to really consider what's in the best interest of everyone in this situation. I mean, if we decided to insource, and that's a conversation we are looking into, there are other implications. There's a union involved here. And so that means when you're trying to have a negotiation or a conversation, it's not just with Olympus now, right? You have a third party that you have to also engage and make sure that they're okay with that. And so that complicates matters. In addition, you want to make sure that the allegations that people are saying are also accurate. I would say one thing that I completely wholeheartedly agree with, and we are making a move to do, and we want to support, is letting the cleaning staff and everyone here at Ursinus be part of our community. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that point, is that I don't see these as being mutually exclusive. You can be a member of our community and actually have a third party a vendor that we use to employ you. For example, Sodexo is a third-party vendor, and they all wear Ursinus shirts. I think Ron Wood is felt to be really close to the community. Mr. Wismer has been part of that organization. I think to act like that's not part of our community is probably a misnomer. I certainly feel as though they're part of the community, and yet they are coming through a third-party vendor. And so I don't think that just because the cleaning staff comes through a third-party vendor that eliminates their ability to be part of the community. So the first point I'll make is that it's really important for us to make them part of our community. That is what we want to work towards. The second point is if there are allegations that are accurate about some of the negativity and actions against them, we want to actually put pressure on Olympus to take corrective action, and we have done that, and they have made some progress in that area. Is it enough? We have to do some more investigation. But get to the last point, which is, will we necessarily insource? From my perspective, that's a larger conversation that we're engaging in, but it's more important that, A, they feel part of the community, or they are part of our community. I don't want to use they in a negative pronoun there. But also that they're protected and they're safe, and that these allegations, if they're true, that we take corrective action.
I think I just want to make sure that we're getting their argument correctly when they say part of the community, because I think that they're talking less about the necessary, like the more, for lack of a better term, ephemeral parts of community, the kind of interpersonal things. Although I think they would like to see a more friendly disposition to the cleaning staff. I think that when they say part of the community, they mean having a space of accountability where that they can access directly, that the students can help advocate for directly. Right. I think that they feel that by doing this, by doing a third party, engaging a third party company, it excludes them from engaging in what they see as an effective way. They want to be able to have someone that they have a relationship with that they can call on when things may go awry.
So a couple points on that, because I understand that point. And again, other third-party agencies, we don't seem to have as much of a barrier, so maybe that's part of the difference. You can talk to people at Sodexo and have that sort of thing. One is they are obviously having some kind of, by they, I'm referring to USAS here. USAS is having some engagement because they're getting information, so it's not as though there isn't some element of that. There is a tension here, and that is Olympus has some rules about the amount of time that you can engage workers, because workers have to be cleaning and doing their sort of activity. If they're spending a lot of their activity not doing that, then that's sort of outside of the purview. I don't want to defend that practice or not defend that practice, but I'm saying I think that's where some of the tension lies, is that students want to be able to talk, you know, and take people away from their jobs for conversations. And I think that Olympus is seeing that as taking them away from, you know, their activity at work. And that's an area that I think we can certainly have a conversation about how to, you know, improve. But that's my sense of where some of this is that there's this tension between the company trying to make sure workers are, you know, doing what they're being paid for at the time versus students who are interested in providing for other opportunities. My understanding, and I could be wrong in this, and so maybe I shouldn't say this on camera, but my understanding is we are trying to find other ways to give access through ESL and other sorts of things. I think we're looking for a lot of those other areas that we can engage, but I think what would be more productive in the conversation, as opposed to insourcing versus outsourcing, is helping to define those areas where we feel that they're not being treated as part of the community, and see if we can shrink that space so that more and more the sorts of things we'd like to be able to have them feel when they're here, that we can make good on those possibilities.
Do you think that there is currently an effective flow of communication and information to you?
I think are you talking about from USAS, or are you talking about from Olympus?
I mean,
are you talking about
from both, I guess, and even from the cleaning staff themselves. Do you think that you're able to effectively
I think we're still working on evaluating it. Okay. I mean, it's a little frustrating for me, quite frankly. This has been a 2-year process, and I don't mean to make it about me. I'm just trying to express that I understand the frustration too, because I've had, you know, numerous engagements with Olympus and with their management about this issue, and I've had numerous conversations, or people in my group, particularly Annette Parker, the new CFO, or Bob Clothier, the general counsel, have had a lot of engagement with USAS, and I think sometimes I feel like those conversations are useful and that we make progress, and then I find out, you know, when people leave, maybe we didn't all listen and hear at the level that we need to. And all that means to me is that we just need to keep talking, we need to keep engaging, and that's why I began by saying I appreciate the vigilance of USAS. They're trying to do something I think that's very noble. They care about a member of our community. I care about a member of our community. We need to find a way that we can get to a place where both sides feel that they're as compromised as in the right sense of the word as we can for equilibrium.
Do you have any sense of a timeline of when you need to have that done by, or when you want to have that done by? You said it's been a 2-year process.
It's been a 2-year process. It seems like, but I think there's been some progress. Like I said, I think there has been some change in management in Olympus. I think we're now on in this next contract, this is the one. This next year is when we're going to have to make a decision about whether or not we continue with Olympus or we can look for a different outside vendor, or if we decide to do it insourcing in that way.
I just have one more question on this topic. And I guess it's more broadly, but I think it is an important thing to define. And that's basically like, you've talked about doing these kinds of explorations and evaluations of what is alleged. And I was wondering, what is the college's process for doing that? And how do you view your role in interacting with these kinds of allegations against third parties?
Well, so there's a couple. Again, this is where it's a little more complicated.
Right.
There's a union. So if somebody says that there was harassment or wage theft or these other sorts of allegations, the union has some responsibility and role to ensure that that's being, managed. The management of Olympus then has to respond to the union or the allegation, and they have to provide evidence that it's satisfactory to us. At the end of the day, we're the decision makers whether we want to continue a contract. And so if they demonstrate that they are not looking out for workers, and they do it continually, then corrective action has to be taken. Some of the corrective action has been that there's been changes in their management. Some of the people who were overseeing workers are no longer overseeing those workers because the allegations prove that there was not the right kind of response that we wanted. And Olympus recognized that, and Olympus eliminated people from positions based on that. So that's a way that the process would work. But again, you have a couple parties there. You have the union to engage, you have Olympus to engage. And then if, let's say that over time, there continues to be more and more allegations, and we don't look at it doesn't look like they're taking corrective action, it doesn't look like they're being receptive, that would demonstrate that this is just not a good relationship for us to continue forward with.
So just so I'm clear on the flow, and I'm sorry if I'm not understanding you. So a complaint goes to the union, which then goes to Olympus or any other
correct
company.
And we're made aware of it, yes.
Okay, and you're made aware of it at that point, and not after. You're not made aware of solely Olympus's evaluation of their self.
No,
if that makes sense.
Well, this is where I give USAS and other groups credit because they help make us aware, and so that this is where we have the advantage in an engagement with Olympus to say these things are going on. Has a worker formally made a complaint, right? So you see the difference there, right?
Yeah.
If a worker goes to a student and says, geez, I being mistreated, I'm being harassed, and the student says, oh my gosh, you're being harassed, and then Olympus says no formal complaint has been made, well then that creates a challenge there, because it's one thing to complain about your situation, it's one thing to raise it to a formal complaint. A person who is being harassed may also not feel comfortable raising to it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's.
And that's where the union needs to be engaged there. So it is a socialization process. It's an acculturated process. It's not as simple as that, but you have to go through a process in order to be able to evaluate it. So there has to be a formal complaint. But that formal complaint, I think, has been more easily managed because I appreciate USAS's help in this, appreciate the union's help in making us aware, so then we can put pressure on Olympus to say, we hear these complaints, will you investigate if there's a formal complaint? And then they basically have to answer to us because they have to be accountable to us.
Fair enough. Great.
All right.
So I think we should move on to our next topic.
We can move on.
Yeah.
This is a question from a student. What do you view as Ursinus' #1 asset?
Well, I kind of already answered that a little bit, which I think is is our students. But one of the things I really do like about our students is, and if you look at the web page, I like if you look back down there and you press a button, and you get just some of the student profiles. To me, that is our best asset. And if you look at what students, we're more than a major. Everyone's engaged in a variety of activities, whether it's different majors or different clubs, or whether you're doing athletics, or whether you're doing CIE fellows, or all these different sorts of things that we're doing. Engaged in our interdisciplinary centers. I think all of that stuff is really important. but there's also an authenticity to who we are as students. I've taught at other institutions, and you get a mix of that, but sometimes at institutions you get, you know, a certain level of pretension. You know, you get a certain separation and lack of keeping it real, if you will. And I think that is what I love about our students, and that has been true for 150 years, and there's no interest in changing that, because I do think that's one of our strongest assets.
Great.
All right. So that kind of ties into like the cohesive aspect of the community here, and I was wondering if you think like the community, including the students and faculty, do they have a good understanding of like your strategic plan and your vision for Ursinus?
Wow. So that's a fantastic question, and I think the answer to that is you should ask them, and I do ask them. I think what I'm bringing is a very different approach. It builds on an incredible approach that we've been doing. So I'm not going to deviate from the special sauce, as I was saying earlier, that we have, but there is a way of sort of pivoting a little bit off of that. And I think that creates some change. And so that's naturally going to create some discomfort and heat. And that's going to be my job then to try to communicate, over-communicate. I'm working on it. It's not always been my strength, that message. And so what we've done is on the website, on the President's office, we're putting up all my communications to the community. We're going to put up this new strategic plan once it's approved by the board, which we anticipate will be in May. I'm doing these things called BLTs, Brock's Lunch Talks, for faculty and staff. I've met several times with the student government group to be able to do that. We're putting a blueprint, which is a longer version. So you get a sense of what I'm trying to do, because I do recognize it's a little different. The place really hasn't had a lot of strong direction in the way that I'm moving it in a little bit of time. And so I think people are trying to understand that. Naturally, that's going to create many opportunities to continue to have this conversation. And that's why I do appreciate us being able to meet here and talk, because I do want to continue to put out there that what we're trying to do is create this sort of flexible model for the future, use our nimbleness, our smallness to our advantage to continue to do these great things that builds on this asset of authentic students, but also allows us to be competitive in this tight marketplace for ideas for the next 150 years.
So do you think these efforts have helped like create an open dialogue? Is there an exchange of information, or is it?
I think, quite frankly, I think it's making progress. I don't think we're there yet. I think we need to continue to get there yet. I can only do so much in a conversation, because the real conversations and the real things that happen are happening peer to peer. You know, I think we know that, right? Students get together after whatever, they'll give their two thoughts, and faculty or staff will get together and they'll give their two thoughts. And it's got to be continuing conversation. But I will, so that's going to take some time. I don't think we're there yet. But I will say what's really important for us to see is if we get this right, if we as an institution of 2,000 or so people, if you take faculty, staff, and students, we're small enough, but we're strong enough. If we're all aligned, we break down the silos. We become much less vertically integrated, much more horizontally integrated. We are moving as a team, and everybody knows the game plan is this strategic plan, which is flexible, which is only 2 pages long, 7 points, and we're all trying to be this first choice institution. We can disagree on some of the specifics, we can argue about it, but if we all know that's the essentially the platform that we're going to use, we can do so much more than most institutions. Because I've been at other institutions, we go to them all the time, and you see that people get so caught up in their day-to-day stuff that they don't really necessarily work cohesively to be able to make a big giant leap forward. And I know we can, because the stuff we do with faculty and students is remarkable. So if we build on that and we're able to push that forward as one unit, we're going to, and we've had 150 years of excellence, we're going to continue to have many, many more years and pivot in a stronger way. And so that's why I feel so passionately about it. It's because everyone needs to be everyone needs to understand, if we want to be successful and nimble and use our smallness to our advantage, coming off that same sort of game plan, that same roadmap is going to definitely give us a huge advantage.
Our next question comes from a student, and it was also brought up by a number of other students, but this is the most contextualized phrasing of it. And it has to do with mental health on campus among the student body, which many students described as either a crisis or bordering on a crisis that many people do not want to talk about. This student said that they had just talked to a professor who said that of all the institutions they had taught at, that this was the most unhealthy in terms of mental health, the most stressed out and anxious. And then additionally, the student said that within the past week, they had 3 friends have to take medical leave. And it's also clear that wellness, and this is not their fault at all, and I don't want to imply that they are overburdened, that there's just too much of a need for them to fit everyone in responsibly. And then finally, there was a student who took their own life last semester. So I wanted to ask, should administration be more hands-on in this? Do you view that as something that needs to be, that there needs to be some sort of intervention? And do you think that this is as big of a problem as students seem to think?
So I really appreciate this question, and I think there's many layers here. I think a big message I'd like to put out is that this is important. Everybody wants everyone to be as healthy. We want everyone to be as safe and secure as we can. That's one of the things that we make a primary interest here at Ursinus. But I think that some of the dialogue on mental health issues misses kind of the larger point that's going on in our world today. And I will challenge that one question the faculty member said about institutions being different. I would say what's happened, I believe, is more recently there's been an upsurge across the nation. So if you aren't necessarily engaged in watching that temporal dynamic versus the cross-institutional dynamic at the same time, you might come up with that same sort of conclusion. One of the things I think that's important people to understand is everybody wants to, in some sense, minimize the challenges associated with this, and I think it's important for us to understand that we have to accept a normalization of these things. And what I mean by that is, I think everybody wants people to be more healthy, and I do, but I think in doing so, people want to find a solution. There's a problem. Let's just quickly go and put all these resources, and that takes away from the fact that we need to accept at some level, I want to be very careful by saying that this is the way it's going to be on college campuses. It's an incredibly stressful period in people's lives. You're adjusting from being you're in your home life into this other life. You're being engaged in a lot of different activities. People are looking for remedies to that challenge. That involves substances. It involves alcohol. That creates a whole nother layer of challenges here. I can tell you on national trends, we're actually experiencing an increase, but our increase is actually below the national trend in terms of students that are seeking help in this area, and students that are using alcohol or substances to try to engage in this area. We're actually below some of the norms in those categories. So this is a serious issue on campus, but what I'm trying to say is I think we at some point need to understand, destigmatize the issue. We need to stop making it completely focused about let's just fix this problem, as opposed to saying, well, it's not, this is it's a global trend of people of this age group, and we need to be able to find resources and support for those people. About 3 years ago, we actually increased our staff dramatically to be able to support people in that area. And I can tell you, I was talking to Jessica Perillo yesterday. about these particular issues, and she was saying, while it's hard for people to understand, we are actually responding more quickly than a lot of other institutions are. Most institutions have longer waiting lists to get in to see. We actually don't really have waiting lists. We have some time within the week that we try to schedule for students. So I think we actually have increased on the administrative side our ability to support. Can we do better? I think we can always do better. That began with my first question you asked about being a first choice institution. We can always strive to do better. Is this a serious problem on our college campuses? Absolutely. Is this something that we need to address? Absolutely. But I think it's also something that we need to be thoughtful about and think about it in a destigmatizing way and understand and accept that people do get stressed out during exams and periods, and they do need opportunities and places to go. And instead of saying, let's fix that problem in a way that's going to cause people to maybe go underground or cause people to feel threatened, like maybe something's wrong with me because I feel this way. We need to be able to say, no, this is very normal. That's what I mean by normalize it. We're here to provide resources and help you through this. And as the community begins to accept that more, I think that's going to help in this area. I don't disagree or understand why people would feel that way, because we want to solve challenges. But I think it's important for us to understand that what's really important here is to destigmatize this.
I just wanted to, so I think that people's objection to that, if I'm anticipating it, would be that the metrics that you cited were not the most accurate assessments. Whether or not people are seeking help is kind of dictated by the severity of their mental illness many times, as well as the availability of help. And the stigmatization, as you said, so that's not necessarily an accurate way of reading the climate. And I was just wondering if you think that there is a way of getting a more detailed and nuanced understanding of these issues.
Thank you, Brian, because I think you're exactly right. All of these metrics are self-selected, and reported in a way that, what does a low number mean? Does that mean that we're able to reach a lot of people and manage it well, or does it mean that people are afraid and stigmatized and they don't want to express themselves? And so I do think we need to look at different ways that we can try to get a handle on this. We are looking more at surveys with students, finding different ways we can ask them directly. And I would encourage students, if you're asked to fill a survey, and I know that sometimes like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? But that's the way we can get feedback from students to know how we're doing. And so that's certainly one way we can try to do that, is get a better handle on it. And I don't want to minimize this and say we've got all this covered. I want to be very clear that I'm saying this is a challenge for us. We need to do a better job. But what I am trying to change the dialogue, if I can, is make it about normalization, so that if the reason that we're not measuring this well is because some students are feeling anxious about actually going and doing this, we want to do our best to disabuse people of that. And I think the answer to that is communication and culture. And I think that's where we need to continue to have conversations like this, and we need to acculturate ourselves to understand those aspects. As we improve in that area, then we will get a better handle on where we are in terms of grading ourselves. So I think those are fair criticisms, and those are things we need to be thoughtful towards.
All right. Kind of related, but what is your perception of the student culture at Ursinus in general?
Well, it's interesting. We had an external review. So I asked for a different party outside of Ursinus to come in and ask questions of students, student affairs, to try to get a handle on questions just like that. So that because I hear certain things from Dean Nolan and others, I hear certain things when I talk to students, but I want a third party perspective so I can put all that stuff together. And we got a report recently. I think student culture here is a little atomistic, if I can use that word. I think students have a great experience here. They love it here. They have an affinity here, but a lot of their affinities are in small groups. I don't want to use the word cliques, but I'll talk about it in an atomistic way. People, if I ask you what your affinity is, you might say, I work for the Grizzly. If I ask another group, they'd say, and this isn't, by the way, just this class. I ask alums this question all the time. They want to come back because they're really excited about their Greek organization. Another group's really excited about being on the athletic team. Another group's really excited about their experiences in Summer Fellows. And I think all those things are terrific. I can go on and on and on, right? But what that is meaning is that affinity and that engagement to the institution is within a smaller realm. And so then when you want to talk about issues and you want to feel what's really going on, it makes it more difficult to really connect to the mothership. It makes it more difficult to be folks, as I said in the beginning, about this being this agile, nimble thing where we're all trying to move together to make Ursinus as strong as it can be, because we're a little bit more caught up in our own things. I would like a world in which we could do both better. I would like a world in which people could feel really good, and I hope they do feel good about whatever that atomistic marker is for themselves, but I'd also like them to see it through the lens of the larger Ursinus. And so if you do have issues, and we've heard some of them today, it's coming not just through athletics or through student affairs or through academic affairs, but it's coming more from the larger thing. And I think that's also going to create an opportunity for people to want to pay it forward better, quite frankly, right? So if that's the message, if that's how the student culture is seen to be more aligned, then everyone's going to be engaged in finding ways to make us a more inclusive, diverse environment, to provide more resources for scholarships. And so I think my 2 cents is that students tend to have a good experience here, but a lot of it is a little in smaller groups. Let me ask you, it's an interview, is that resonate with you, or is that seem different to you, Sarah?
I would agree. No, I think it's true that students get absorbed in groups, but I think it's also true that students exist in various groups at once. So I wouldn't say that they're entirely disconnected from each other, but I was wondering, do you have any concrete ideas that would help unite the student body?
Well, actually, the point one, if a president comes down with concrete ideas to unite the student body, it's going to fail. Because it's going to look like the president says we should do this, and who wants to do what the president wants to do? What I would love is if students came up with unique and safe, I'm going to put that word safe in there because I hear some ideas all the time from students, but unique and safe, traditions that everyone would go to. If we were Penn State, and I'm glad we're not that Penn State's a great school, so that wasn't what I meant. But, it'd be about football. Everyone would get together, and whether you like football or you didn't like football, people tend to organize around those different sorts of things. And I don't know what that is. COSA, I think, is pretty dang awesome. Again, anything I'm going to suggest is problematic. But if students can maintain it, because what's interesting to me is I've seen when I talk to alums, we have had a tradition in the past, and then it goes away. And we have had a tradition in the past, and it goes away. So I would love to find a thread that students can all engage in. And it would be great to make it about our character and who we are. This wonderful liberal arts institution that has the CIE and is inspiring for a curriculum that's based on inquiry. And, we're doing all these exciting things, and I don't know what that looks like, but that's what I would recommend. What do you think, Brian?
I have no comment. I think that I agree with the assessment that that people do find their groups here and they kind of stick to them. I don't know if that's necessarily even a negative thing. I think that college is a great time to find your people, and a lot of times people feel very isolated in high school, and here's a time where you can find people with similar interests, similar kind of quirks and things like that. So I think that that's actually a positive about Ursinus. But I agree that it does kind of. Then the upshot of that is that.
Well, let me challenge you, because I agree it's a positive. Let me challenge you. Let's say and I'm just going to pick on things. I probably shouldn't do this. This is terrible. I'm looking over here and said, no, stop. But, let's say that there's an allegation that a sports team or a Greek organization is treating, a group, LGBTQ or another group in a way. Don't you see that if there's a better thread there, that maybe that dialogue doesn't turn into us, them? I mean, do you get what I'm?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think that our two kind of assessments aren't mutually exclusive. I think that it would be good to have a broader community to fall back on in times of conflict. But I think that it is nice to know that you have your people within this larger community. So I don't necessarily even disagree. I just think that it's not solely negative.
I agree, and I didn't mean to make it that way either.
Okay. So, yeah, going off on your relationship with the student body, do you think that's positive? Do you think that's changing at all?
Again, I'd ask the student body that question. I mean, I think in some ways it's positive. In some ways it could be better. In some ways it's negative, I'm sure. I deeply care about students here. I think that should be clear. I am definitely interested and go around and I try to promote a lot of student activities through social media and through other things because I deeply care. My time is also very short, and so I often can't develop quite the depth in a lot of those ways that I'd like to do, and so I'd like that to be a little better. I think there's some groups that I feel stronger with, and maybe there are other groups that are pushing against me. I think there are two factors there. It might be about me and my administration and my vision and all that other sort of thing. I also think we're living in a world today where there's a natural tendency to push against authority because I think a lot of our authority figures, whether we talk about government or we talk about corporations, we don't always like what they're delivering. And so I think a tendency is to push back, and so that maybe that's that. What do you think my relationship is with students? You probably know more than me.
I think it's related to the disconnect that you mentioned before. So I think different ideas are kind of coming at you from different directions. And I don't know that any one opinion is indicative of a larger student body opinion. So do you think there's anything constructive about the criticism you receive, maybe from the negative, maybe on social media or otherwise?
Well, I'm at the end of the day, I'm always self-reflective and self-aware. It's not that I'm not listening to things. I see when people poke at me. I think what I would like to do is create more opportunities for engagement. I don't know what the right way to do that is, quite frankly. I've done larger town halls. I've done things at student government. I'll see people at events. I'll have people over to my house for the Algonquin Roundtable for seniors. So maybe looking for different other types of forums to engage students. I'd look for that as an opportunity. I don't know. Maybe someone can give me some advice as to the right way to do that. But it's not that I'm trying to not engage and be really thoughtful and interested in students. I think the challenge is the constraints of time and also the constraints of medium. I don't know what the right forum is for a lot of these sorts of things.
Okay.
I want to be respectful of your time. I know
Okay.
You said. That
Yeah, I probably have about 5 minutes.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions.
We do.
I talked too long, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So we have kind of 3 questions that I don't want to put you in a position where you have to answer them super quickly, but I think we might have to just answer them as quickly as possible.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, so
Rapid fire round.
and I wish that we were able to give these questions more time because they all are student questions about very serious topics. So one student cited a trend in U.S. colleges where presidents were taking a more active and direct role in speaking out against microaggressions on campus and issues surrounding racism. And I'm using their exact language here. They asked why you also haven't taken that direct approach of confronting the student body.
Well, I think part of it is capacity building, quite frankly. I think I would like to work with Terrence and our new dean, Mark Schneider, when he comes in July, and build some infrastructure around different initiatives. I want to build an institute for equity and inclusion. We want to, I think we've talked about it before, put it here in the heart of Wismar on the campus. And really, it's not about brick and mortar. It's all about all the programming that we want to be able to do about that. Mm-hmm. And I want to create this thing where it's a community. And the community isn't just students. It's faculty, it's staff. It's everybody should want to be engaged in this kind of a conversation. I got to build up some of that capacity before I can have some of the dialogue and raise expectations in different ways. Sitting behind a desk and sending out emails or talking to people without necessarily having some of that in place is going to move expectations in the wrong direction. So I got to get a little bit more of the capacity building in place. But students should know it's incredibly important to me. If it weren't important, I wouldn't have, made large moves that the institution's never moved before. I mean, we're bringing someone to the cabinet level to look at issues like this. We've never looked at that sort of thing. We're doing surveys of the entire student body and faculty and staff to try to get a handle on these things. But speaking out specifically on microaggressions and things along those sorts of lines, obviously I want this to be a safe environment for students. I want people to feel heard and cared for. And that message needs to come from me, but it also needs to come from various other layers of the staff. It needs to come from our academic affairs, our student affairs. Students need to continue to support that. But I have been waiting to get a little more on the capacity building side, and then I have made some comments. I'm sure I will make more.
Okay, this is a question that is hard to touch on in a short amount of time as well, but it's something that came up as a big concern for a lot of students. So, like, we know, as any other campus does, that we have issues with sexual assault, and it's not an Ursinus specific problem, but it is of concern to many students here. So, do you think there's anything the college can or should do to help mitigate that?
So I think this is a serious issue, and I think it's a serious issue at all college campuses to include our own. I've definitely talked to Dean Nolan about different sorts of programs and initiatives we can do, and she's got a long list of activities that she's trying to marshal to help us in that area. We've increased our staffing, supporting for things like Title IX and other sorts of allegations. For me, I would like to see us change culture here a little bit. Often sexual assault and issues associated with this aren't unrelated to things like alcohol and substance abuse, that aren't unrelated to whether we have safer and more secure structures. So part of this whole student commons concept of having a coffee shop late at night is to provide for alternative programming so students aren't necessarily in places where we could see some risky behaviors happening. We're trying to mitigate some of that. I've asked the student affairs staff to model after their own core values that we want to implement in programming for orientation and through student life, through residential living, and they're doing that. So I actually think we can do more, and we can do a better job of providing support. And we've increased our safety and security staff. We're changed our processes to make them more vibrant, and all of those things are continuing to happen. But I also think, on a larger philosophical point, we need to become an institution that is more safe and secure, and that means looking for alternative programming from some of the sort of alcohol. Going to Reimert on Friday night cannot be the cultural pinnacle of what we do here. And I'm not saying you can't have fun, but I think looking for as many opportunities as we can to proactively be thoughtful and have a value system is important.
I just want to say quickly that one of the students who asked about this mentioned that these alternative programs are all well and good, but that many of the people who either are victims or victimizers probably will not partake in them. And it's not. They cited this kind of like hyper-masculine culture around here, especially the lack of diversity in spaces like Reimert, where it's mostly suites that are occupied by men, to put it bluntly, and they were wondering if like a hands-on approach to diversifying these spaces and making them
So
safer.
we haven't done, that's a good question. That's something I could definitely explore with Dean Nolan. What we have done this year is increased our safety and security in Reimer to try to limit some of that. We have, and I can tell you, if there's, you know, any kind of allegation, we take it very seriously, and people go through a very strong process, and we've increased our staffing in that. But we don't want to have to get to that point, obviously.
Right,
We
yeah.
want to be preventative. But yeah, thinking about different ways to mix up the rooms at Reimer, that's an interesting...
That's just what they specifically
No, it's an
cited,
interesting
so,
idea.
yeah.
I'll explore that with Dean Nolan.
So we have 2 questions that
All
I
right.
think.
I can be a go ahead.
Okay. So aside from the IDC and Commons, what are your main project goals? That even if they haven't been announced yet, what is your dream?
Well, I mean, I think the next thing on the horizon, I was saying, is this Institute for Equity and Inclusion. I really do think this is really important to Ursinus. It's part of our heritage, it's part of who we are. I think we've done a good job, but we need to do a lot better, quite frankly. And one of the things I would like to have as my legacy when we leave is that we will have much more structure, much more support, much more infrastructure in that area. And I think that probably goes throughout the college. I would like to see us build a lot more capacities in all the areas. We are a college where the backbone and structure is on academics, student achievement, and I think that's always a strength, but we need to scaffold around a lot of those in other areas, and that's the other stuff I would like to see us do. Big picture, like I said in the beginning of this conversation, I would like us to be a destination community. Ultimately, this is a place that I want everyone to feel as their home now and forever. And when you two come back and for your reunions or whatever it is in the future, I want the college to continue to be a draw for you.
And finally, we just have one more. In 1,000 years, what 3 contemporary texts or writers do you think will be on the CIE curriculum?
Wow, that was 3.
You can do 1 or 2. I know we're running low on time.
Yeah.
That's
In fact, why don't you just pick one?
No, contemporary authors. Gosh, I don't. This is an impossible challenge if you think about it, because I think you really need space and time to understand it. If you had asked this question to me 50 years ago, I might say Hemingway, and yet Hemingway is no longer something people that read. I think in some ways we'll probably continue to look at some early Greek authors. I think they'll always be on that list. But I do have, I do wonder if, you are going to see some of the more contemporary people today, entering that space. I don't know. I like Julian Barnes. I think he does some great stuff, but I don't know that he'll ever raise to a CIE level.
Fair enough. Great.
All right.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
We really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone who has watched this entire interview
All right.
to the end. So great. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Really appreciate it.